In this lesson, we'll learn how to work with adjustment layers, and we'll also take a look at our other layer properties. As we saw in the previous lesson, we still need to fix the left arm. You can see how the arm is oriented in a very weird way as the creature falls. So what we could then do is use an adjustment layer to make this fix. And what's great is that this is a very non-destructive and safe way of working. So if we don't quite like the change we make, we could either dial down the layer's weight or simply remove the layer without having to worry about it interfering with our original animation. So let's go ahead and get started here by grabbing our character's arm and heading over to our motion panel. And we'll move over to our layer manager. Alright, so notice we have two choices here. We can work with a local adjustment layer or a world layer. Now a local layer is going to consider any changes made in the layer before it and will allow us to add on top of those changes. So to make this clear, what I'll do is create a primitive object, let's say a box, and I'll show the grid. Drawing this box out, I'll now go in and clone it, just shift dragging up, make this a copy, and I'll go ahead and link the lower box to the upper box. So let's think of the lower box as our local layer. In the layer before, you can see how the information will be fed to our local layer, and then it's then a way to go ahead and add on top of what is received from the upper layer here. So this would be a great way to add exaggeration. So let's say if our character is jumping and it's not quite jumping high enough, well, we could then use a local layer to add that change. Now a world layer, it's almost as if the lower box is not linked. So then it's a great way to animate without having to counter key. In our case, a world layer is going to work best for our arm. So let's go ahead and work with that. Again, with that selected, we'll move back to our motion panel and we'll create this world layer. I would like to point out that if you notice there's a slight shift in your rig when you apply any one of the adjustment layers, it's very simple to fix. You'd head over to your curve editor and you'd simply make sure that each track of your adjustment layer is initially zeroed out, because remember, this is a relative change from the layer before it, so all of these should start at a value of 0. So we're good to go here. Okay, great. So at this point we could go ahead and start to fix the arm. Let's first start by saving what we like to see. I kind of like the pose on frame 0, so I'll make sure that's saved. Let's go ahead and turn on auto key, and we'll go ahead and set a keyframe on the arm as well as on our palm control. And now as we get to frame 6, we'll need to go ahead and save the same pose. So again, I'll go in and key the palm and the upper arm. Then we don't want to forget about our IKFK modes. So we can go ahead and do the same thing here. Let's go ahead and make sure that the IK mode is saved on 6. We could do that quickly by simply dialing up the layer and then dialing it back down to 0 on frame 6, and then on frame 0 we should already have a key saved, but if not, again, you could go ahead and dial this down and then dial it back up to create that weight of 1 for FK. Alright, so now that we have isolated this as part of the animation to create our change, we can now go ahead and go to the frame that needs some work, and that's on frame 2. You'll notice that when we start to rotate, we don't quite get the full control we'd expect in either IK or FK modes. The reason why is because we are currently blending between the two modes. So, in order to get a full amount of control, we'd either have to choose what mode we'd like to work with here, or it's just a matter of not blending between the two modes. So of course we need to make sure we have those blend keys. So here I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the arm is set to a full weight of 1 for FK. And now we can start to pose the arm, get it exactly the way we want it. So I've done that on frame 2. Alright, great. I kind of like how the arm kind of curves in before the creature falls. It might create a nice little jiggle to the elbow. Let's play this back. Beautiful. Alright, so we've learned how to work with an adjustment layer to add changes without having to worry about them being destructive changes. So again, if we didn't like what we had, we could always go in, head over to our adjustment layer, and then we could start to either dial down the weight here globally or locally. We know how the global weight works, but let's go ahead and work with the local weight. So this is a way of changing the animation on a per object basis based off of what we have selected. To show you this, to make this clear, I'm going to go ahead and work with our IK control object. So with that selected, and I'll turn off auto key, let's say if we didn't quite want to see the result of the IK. Well, in that case, I'd go ahead and set the local weight to 0. Now, when we do that, we could still see the IK animation. That's simply because of the layer we currently have selected. We did not animate this IK control on this layer. So, if I were to go ahead and set this back to 100%, I'll then go into the layer before, the base layer that is, and watch this. When we set this to a value of 0, no longer are we in IK mode. But chances are we're going to want this set to 100%, but I just wanted to show you how the local weight works. Now, another really neat feature is the time warp tool. So we can go into our curve editor here and we can change the velocity of our layer. All right, so making sure our original animation is selected by selecting the absolute layer. We can now go ahead and find our time warp layer. Here it is, and you can see by default we have a linear float controller connected to it. This can be changed by right-clicking and heading over to Assign Controller. And then at that point, if you'd like to work with a Bezier float, you most certainly can. But at this point, you then want to just go in and add keys. We can right-click and choose the Add Key tool and go in and create keys to change the animation. This kind of gets a bit confusing to work with, to get just right. So I'm not going to go ahead and dedicate any more time to that in this course, but we will have a course focused on ways we can work with CAT animation layer system because it's very robust and very fun to use. Alright, so at this point I'm now going to go ahead and head back to the Move Key tool. Let's go ahead and minimize the curve editor. So those are a few of our other options that we have tied to the animation layer system. We've learned how to create adjustment layers. We've also learned about our global and local weight values. Then we took a look at the time warp tool. Something else I'd like to point out about the time warp is that you can see how it reads whatever our current frame is. So when we start to add keys, let's say if we were on frame 41, and we added a key here and dialed that down to 20, you'll notice that the animation will play back slower. So we need to be very careful with that to make sure that we create the amount of keys needed so that the animation still plays back to its full length by just making sure that by the time we get to the end of the animation, we have a key that is set on our last frame that records this value of our last frame. And it's just a matter of selecting the key, going to your key stats, and making sure that value reads the last frame. So in this case, we'd want to make sure that last key is a value of 68. All right, but again, it's kind of complex to work with, so I'm going to make sure that we dedicate more time and effort to it in a course to come. But another thing I'd like to point out to you before we close this lesson off is the Ignore and Solo tools. So really quick, this is just a way of either ignoring a layer. If we wanted to ignore the base layer here, we could just go ahead and click this, and now we see our skin pose. If I were to turn this off and choose Solo, we will only see the result of this layer. Everything else is canceled out. But those are our layer options. All right, great. Well, that finishes this lesson. So in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and learn how to save out our animations and poses to work more efficiently.